So we're beginning part 1 of Chapter 55's lecture on ecosystems. And an ecosystem is going to consist not only of all the organisms that live together in a community, but also the abiotic factors that they interact with. So ecosystems can range in size from a microcosm like the space under a fallen log to a larger area like an entire lake or an entire island. Looking at our layers and different levels in ecology, as a review, we started with the individual organism when we were looking at Chapter 51 and animal behavior. And then when we look at how these organisms live together as species, we're looking at the population. And then these populations are interacting with other species in a community. And then the next level, which we're on now, is that ecosystem when we add in how are those different species in the community going to interact and depend on the abiotic factors that make up the ecosystem. These are just two pictures of different ecosystems and show how they can vary so much. There's an island ecosystem there on the top, and then a desert spring ecosystem there on the bottom. So again, an ecosystem is all the organisms in a community plus the abiotic factors. But when we're looking at an ecosystem, its size and also its makeup, we're going to look at two main processes always. And the first is how does energy flow through that system? And second, how are chemicals or nutrients cycled within that ecosystem as well? Because ecosystems are self-sustaining. They have energy that flows through them and passes from trophic level to trophic level. And also, they need to have the chemicals and nutrients, the building blocks within the ecosystem that can be cycled so that everything that is needed for that ecosystem is present. The two essential concepts that this comes down to are that energy is flowing through an ecosystem and matter is cycling within that system. So keeping those two things straight, that energy is going to flow through, matter stays within the system and just cycles. So the laws of physics and chemistry apply to ecosystems, and especially when we're talking about energy flow. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. So energy enters an ecosystem as solar radiation, and it's conserved as it passes through. There is energy lost from the organisms as it passes from layer to layer, but that energy is actually lost as heat. That second law of thermodynamics states that every exchange of energy increases the entropy of the universe. So in an ecosystem, energy conversions are not completely efficient, and that energy that's lost as heat is actually contributing to the entropy of the universe. So there is still this consistency with the second law of thermodynamics. The other law in physics that we look at when we're looking at the cycling of nutrients is that matter cannot be created or destroyed. So in this case, when we're looking at the nutrient cycles or the biogeochemical cycles is what we really call them, such as the carbon cycle. No new carbon is being made within an ecosystem. It is just being cycled around. So again, we have consistency with this basic law of matter, that it can't be created or destroyed. Again, the law of conservation of mass states that matter cannot be created or destroyed. So chemical elements like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus are continually recycled within an ecosystem. For example, in a forest ecosystem, most of the nutrients will enter as dust or solutes in the rain and then get carried away in the runoff water. But ecosystems are open systems, meaning they'll absorb energy in mass and release heat and waste products. Moving on to the next slide. Here we go. So we're going to look first at the carbon cycle. And as we're looking at that, again, these are biogeochemical cycles. They are the major nutrient cycles in an ecosystem, and they involve both biotic and abiotic components. And when we're looking at these cycles, what we want to look at is what is the chemical's biologic importance to the ecosystem, and what forms does that chemical take as it flows in its cycle? What are the major reservoirs for that chemical within the ecosystem? And what processes drive the movement of the chemical through its cycle? So, as you know, carbon-based organic molecules are essential to all organisms. They are a major component of all organic compounds. So it's important to have an efficiently and well-running carbon cycle. So you can see here we have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and then that becomes fixed through photosynthesis, and then it is respirated again out through plants and animals in cellular respiration. So that is the major flow of carbon that is a constant cycling that occurs. But carbon reservoirs also include the fossil fuels found deep in the soil, in soil itself because of the deposition of dead material in the sediments, solutes in the oceans or bodies of water, the plant and the animal biomass itself. Are all the animals, all the plants are storing carbon compounds. And then the atmosphere and sedimentary rocks are other major reservoirs. This is just a process. Okay, so I'm going to show you this quick little bioflix on the carbon cycle. Get it to run. There we go. The next cycle we're going to look at is the nitrogen cycle. So nitrogen, as you know, is a component of amino acids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And the main reservoir for nitrogen is in the atmosphere in the form of N2. And though this nitrogen has to be converted to NH4 or NO3 for uptake by plants, it is a major part of the cycling of this element. So nitrogen does get fixed with the help of bacteria from its gaseous form into a usable form for the plants to use. And you can see it looks a little complicated below the soil here, but you can see that process occurring. So we have atmospheric oxygen, which is fixed by bacteria in the soil, and then it's taken up by plants and incorporated into the plant, which is then eaten. Also, it is fixed by plankton with nitrogen-fixing bacteria in bodies of water. And then, of course, it's eaten by herbivores who then pass it on to carnivores. And then when those organisms die, we have a return of the nitrogen back into the soil. And there's also some returning of it from the soil back into atmospheric nitrogen. The process by which the nitrogen returns to the atmosphere directly from the soil is through denitrification by specific bacteria that do this process of denitrification. Okay, so a big part of these cycles, actually both that we've looked at so far, is the presence of a decomposer or a detritivore. They play a key role in that pattern of chemical cycling because they take the dead and decaying material and help release these elements back into the circulating cycle. The rates at which this nutrient cycle in different ecosystems are going to vary greatly, and they're mostly going to result in a different rate due to the decomposers. So the rate of decomposition is controlled by temperature, moisture, and nutrient availability. So as you might imagine, places like the tropics have a very high rate of decomposition, which helps fuel the great biodiversity that we see in places that have that tropical climate. And that type of biome has a very quickly nutrient cycle, biogeochemical or nutrient cycling occurring. Okay, so next slide. We're almost at the end of this video, but I'll just end this video with a picture of a couple of detritivores